You all for being here for our monthly African Book Club, hosted by co-founder of African Book Club, Faith Adiele. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Manager at MOAD. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our mission is to celebrate Black cultures, ignite challenging conversations, and inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As we begin again, I invite you to share in the chat where you're joining us from. We also like to ground ourselves in the spaces that we're occupying, as many of us are settlers, immigrants, and or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. Moat occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respect to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage everyone to learn more about the native lands that you occupy by visiting native-land.ca. And that's a resource I'll share in the chat as well. So today we are delighted to be discussing the book Homebound by Vanessa A. And for those of you who may be new to book club, Moad has been in partnership with host and co-founder Faith Adiele since fall 2019. We've now continued the series virtually the last few years, and it's been really wonderful because we've been able to, one, reach a wider audience outside of the Bay Area, as well as invite our authors to zoom in from around the world. And so today is one of those lucky days where we do have our author joining us for the conversation. So Vanessa is here in the waiting room, and we'll be bringing her into this space in just a minute. So in terms of format, we'll begin the first portion of the event with Faith directly in conversation with Vanessa, discussing the book. We invite you to engage with the chat with comments throughout this conversation. And then following that, there should be time for opening it up to everyone to ask questions. And again, Faith will help moderate that process. And then we'll close with any remaining time with just a group conversation to continue discussing the book. When we do open it up to the group conversation, again, be mindful of the space. Please let others share after you've shared. Give at least 2 other people a chance to speak before sharing again. And one other caveat, we always do talk about endings. So even though this is a memoir, we will discuss the full extent of the book. So if you haven't made it all the way through, there may be some surprises for you. And with that, I'll pass it off to Faith, and then we'll be inviting Vanessa into the space.
Great. Thanks so much, Nia. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us on a sunny Sunday afternoon, depending on where you are. I think Vanessa is zooming in from Paris. She's visiting family. I'm not sure if everyone's been able to read the book, but I just wanted to give a quick overview in case you haven't, because you're always welcome to come and get inspired by the book and then read it later. But it is a memoir in essays that looks at the idea of home and belonging. She was born in Cameroon, adopted by her aunt and her aunt's white husband, living in France, and eventually moved to England and then to the US. And there was a lot of kind of housing insecurity within that. I think, Reno, Nevada is where she ended up here. She was raised as a kind of in the evangelical church and married young. And then kind of her journey was then going to Harvard Law and really kind of opening herself up to different ways of being, and kind of leaving that, divorcing her husband, leaving the church, and focusing on a career that has to do with kind of economic justice. She is a housing advocate lawyer, some sort of lawyer. And so, yes, this kind of deals with all of that, with this international upbringing and different ways of looking at home in both legal and personal and cultural different ways. So I think that's enough, right? She writes essays as well, and a number of the chapters in the book have appeared in publications earlier, but she also writes about politics, the left, inequities, things like that. But a lot of them did make their way into the book in some other forms as well. So let's invite her in so then she can get back to her family in Paris. So. Hey, Vanessa, are you here? Consumer protection law, I think, yeah. Okay. Do we have the right Vanessa? Hey.
I cannot
Okay, I hear you now.
Hmm.
You're not hearing me?
Uh,
I'm seeing you and
I'm
hearing
seeing.
you.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Great.
Okay. Are you hearing
Hi.
me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Welcome. And I know it's evening there, so or nighttime. So thanks so
Oh,
much
no, I
for
can't
zooming
hear you
in.
anymore.
Pardon?
I can't hear
You're not hearing me?
you. No. Okay. Now I think.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm sorry. It like cut off again.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Well, welcome. Hopefully this will be okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's a great to see you again. Vanessa was here for the Bay Area Book Festival, and that's where we met this spring, which was great. And I invited you to, I tried to explain the book club to you, and you're like, I know all about it, and I wanted to be part of it. So that's really exciting for us. You were very easy to get. So
Well,
thank you.
I
Thank you so much. So do you are you willing to read a little bit for us to start us off?
That's an excellent question. So I'm actually away from my home in
Okay.
Paris, and I do not have a book with me.
Oh, you don't have it. Okay.
Yes, I do not have it with me.
Okay, that's no problem.
Sorry.
Okay.
Mm.
Then I'll just read a little quotation, an excerpt from the New York Times book review, and then just start to ask you some questions. I did a quick overview of what the book was in case some of the people hadn't read it. Sometimes we get people who are interested in the book, they come and hear the talk, and then they read the book. Some people have read it completely. Some people have read part of it but aren't done. So we invite people at all levels. But one of the things that I thought was really great is in the New York Times book review, it said this book is both an act of defiance, a way to construct a home outside of borders, and a timely manifesto on the need for more equitable housing policy in America, weaving her scholarship in economic justice together with her firsthand experience of the many places she's lived. Homebound is not just a resonant personal history, but also a thoroughly researched investigation of home. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And that is one of the things that I'm someone who's really fascinated with structure and with kind of hybrid formats that reflect hybrid lives. And for those of us who are kind of multi-hyphenates, you're a consumer protection lawyer and an essayist who has this interest in housing and inequities, but you're also multicultural, multilingual. And the book, I think, reflects that. We've, each chapter begins with a dictionary definition. So we've got this ongoing thread about the epigraphs. There are like snippets of dialogue. One of the essays used numbered vignettes. And then we have also kind of housing policy and news transcripts. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the process of coming up with this structure and the decisions you made. When you write a memoir in essays, there's always the question of how do you balance the theme that makes an essay work with a kind of an overarching narrative arc. And there's a somewhat chronological identity quest that's interwoven with these essays that are complete in and of themselves. So whatever you'd like to say about structure would be great.
Yeah, initially when, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And sorry that, again, that I do not have my own book with me. Yeah, in writing it, I tried initially to, I knew I had these very specific things to say about housing. I knew I wanted to talk about Cameroon when I was born, where I was born. I knew I wanted to talk about France and my experience with social housing. I knew I wanted to talk about my experience with housing in America and then moving on to the financial crisis and my current job. And I thought that I would maybe just write like an A to Z memoir
Mm.
in like the educated style educated style where you start out very little and just move chronologically. And I found that it just didn't work. I mean, I got about 36,000 words in, and so quite a like,
Oops.
halfway through the book, and I felt like I couldn't quite, I didn't want to just tell anecdotes, right? Like all the anecdotes were in service of these conclusions that I had drawn as an adult, but I
Mhm.
didn't know how to communicate the conclusions or like the point of the anecdote that I was sharing without stepping out of the narrative. And so
Right.
what you see educated is that you basically, for instance, you don't really know what she thinks or how Tara Westover, the author of this book, which I very much enjoyed, but you sort of have to wait till the end of the book to see the world through her adult eyes. And I feared that if I did that, by the time I got to the end of the book, you might not even remember why I told certain anecdotes in the beginning. So I felt like I kind of had to free myself from the shackles of time and chronology. I still wanted to move chronologically, but the essays kind of freed me to focus on, specific sub themes. It also allowed me to change voices if I needed to communicate what I wanted to communicate.
Mm,
Um,
yes.
yeah, and I just felt like it just allowed me to connect things more seamlessly.
Mhm.
You always run the risk of potentially losing your reader while doing that, but at the same time, I felt like, I've read strangely structured books and I was able to follow, so I just had to kind of trust that I think people will figure it out, and if it works for them, then great.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, I think there are ways in which you can educate your reader to know how to engage with the text. You know, there's a reason for it, that things recur, that you establish patterning, and then you signal that the reward will be greater if they're willing to engage in that way. And I think that you do actually. I think from the very beginning, you're kind of telling us how to read it, because when you begin with that really classic um, moment that happens for any immigrant of color, which is like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Now it's being asked differently because it's this guard who is African as well, I believe. But there is the idea that, you begin with going to get a passport and looking at the importance of kind of documents in kind of saying who we are, and then, questioning what is on the passport. And then the book ends also, where there's a moment where you're being asked for documentation and COVID cards and
Mhm.
that sort of thing, and then in the middle, the character kind of creates an outline for her future. So there is this motif that runs throughout, that like documents are important. And so I'm expecting to see documents in the text anyway.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you could speak more to just kind of using the epistolary form, and what you wanted what you wanted to say about documents and documentation.
Oh yeah, I guess it kind of came up organically. I don't know how
Mm,
intentional I was about it, but
mm,
I come from a culture, at least like on my Cameroonian side, where people don't write things down. And so for me to kind of go back to the beginning, I had these oral stories, and then I had to go back to like the literal birth certificate to see if it matches kind of what I've been told. And so yeah, I actually think it's really affected how I think of my own history, the fact that like my family just doesn't write things down. They just
mm-hmm,
pass it orally. And so for me, it's personally very important to have documentation and to like make sure, like, do they remember things right? Do I remember things right?
mm-hmm,
The chapter where I talk about what was happening in France while I was in boarding school and the police violence.
mm-hmm,
Okay, I have my own memory of the cars being burned that night, but then I had to kind of track down newspaper clippings and coverage, because to me that like anchored the history. And I think the documentation is important too. I mean, especially for memoirists, because what do you have other than my word?
right.
And so I sort of felt like I have to give the reader a reason to trust me on this
Mhm.
journey. So
Right.
it's sort of one of the ways that you can establish that.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you don't get to the answer, which I think the character realizes at the end, there's no like just really clean kind of explanation for why
Yes.
people behave the way they are. Oftentimes it's
Yeah.
just very open about the inquiry. Like, this is the journey I'm going on. These are all the stones I unturned, and we're not going to get to the truth of the capital T. But if you can at least establish an authority for yourself, a transparency to take the reader on the journey where there won't be a clean, neat answer at the end, because that's not how life is.
Yeah.
Particularly given that people have there's so many points of view, and I really get that with all the different family members. And then there are the cultural things that get in the way too, where like someone won't tell you they don't want to do something. They'll just be like, yeah, sure, and then like not show up.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to learn that the right way.
Yes, exactly. So, which is great because the memoir character is kind of, she's learning these cultural cues with us. Like, if you think of Western readers who might not know that, we're learning it with you as well. And so that kind of lets us be, new to this world as well, and kind of just try to sift things and people's different narratives and what's said and unsaid. So I think you did a really great job of kind of helping us be there in your confusion. I probably over-identified with this book. I'm a writer who's multiracial and multinational.
Yes.
I was raised by my mother's white European immigrant family in a trailer home, educated at Harvard, and then didn't meet my Nigerian father until I was in my mid-20s. So I was really resonating with that. And I was thinking about the kind of one of the first things that I produced about it was this documentary called My Journey Home. And I had like gone to Nigeria. I was planning to go to Finland and Sweden. And at a certain point, all my friends gathered in my hometown and they're like, okay, so what is home now? And I'm like, and it wasn't, and I realized through the process of doing that it wasn't a place. Like, I'd grown up hoping there would be a place. And then I was like, but really all I could do was go to different places and feel a little bit of home, and then connect with other people who are that way as well. So I was just wondering how this writing journey helped answer that question for you, or whatever else it brought to you, the process of doing the book.
Yeah, I mean, so going into the book, I had strong opinions about certain things, but also the writing is a way for me to think through questions that I'm genuinely interested in. So I don't know that I necessarily knew where home was, or like where I would conclude that it was at the end of the book. And I still I'm very squishy about it in the book. It's very unclear. I think as I was writing it, it did cement to me that, like, oddly enough, at this point, I feel like the United States and Washington, D.C. specifically really feels like home, in part because I had such autonomy in like choosing it. It was the first home that wasn't just like, that I didn't luck into, or that wasn't imposed onto me, or it's just where your parents live. And so that's where you live. And so I think the act of like planting roots here and having a family here, having a child here, a little person for whom DC is like the only home he's ever known, has really helped cement it. I'm in France right now, and I sort of feel at home, but I just went back to my hometown and actually felt very ill at ease, and I was like, oh, that's a funny feeling. I just, it's not going to make it in the book, but like, there's a feeling that I'm going to have to process. And as I write in the book, of course, Cameroon, but I've always known that, like, even in Cameroon, it's both home and not home. I get there and people immediately can tell that I'm not from there, even though I look like everyone, but there are these other cultural markers that make you stand out. But a place can be like not exactly home and still feel deeply comforting, which is how I feel about Cameroon. Where, like, in some ways, there's some discomfort because I feel like I'm still learning the culture and trying to, I don't know, read in between the lines. But then there are all these other ways in which, like, when I'm there, like my family is so welcoming to me, and to them, I'm just like, oh, this is just our daughter who lives elsewhere, but truly she's always ours, and I feel that love very deeply. And writing the book, writing about my Cameroonian relatives, at least on my mom's side, it just like reminded me of like how beautiful that feeling is, of just like complete acceptance on that side. So between that and like the roots I have in DC, I think those are, yeah, that's home.
That's nice. That's nice. I'm struck by the also you saying that people can tell that you're not from Cameroon. It's so interesting once you've been outside. My husband gets the same thing when he goes back to Nigeria. They're like, you walk like an American because you don't look like at the ground. You just walk just confident that the ground is beneath your feet. Like that there'll be a sidewalk there. And it's just like this interesting body language that people know to see. And that's one of the ways in which you're defining home. It's like it's a community, an actual place of residence, a place of worship, but also the body. You talk about just the role of the body as being home. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's also a lot of the stories that are the most devastating in here, I think, is when the safety of the body is violated.
As I don't know, as a Black woman, I feel like it would have just been impossible for me to write about home and also not write about like just kind of how like your whole body determines how everyone treats you. And it's probably true all around the world just because like the oppression is really far reaching. But it's just I don't know how many other people in the book club have had this, who identify as women and have had this experience. But just there's normal growing pains, and then there's also just like the constant attacks on our bodies. And I feel like Black women are particularly vulnerable to that. And so I don't know, I kind of feel like it's no wonder that like so many of us develop these resentments towards our own bodies, or kind of just want to like shroud ourselves to protect ourselves because the world can be so dangerous to us. So that just felt like really important to write about.
I definitely appreciate that. And it also highlights the importance of having the importance of having a physical home too, of a safe physical home, because once you leave that home that's supposed to be safe and you walk around in this body that houses you but is always targeted, then where does one feel safe? Where does one rest and do the things that we assume that home does? Make us feel safe, make us feel like we belong, give us that opportunity to rest and reset. So I thought this was a really interesting way of handling that. I love the title. And it just that also just felt really satisfying, because we've got this, return to the birthplace. So you're homebound for, the father's burial, which is, traditionally a homegoing, but it's after having been literally homebound during the pandemic. So that, I was like, I love, I just love all of that. And then it was, and then you're ending with the, the kind of the flutterings of life, in your own womb, which is kind of balanced, I think, with the heartbreak of the brother's betrayal. So I'm just, I assume that is a complex, both positive and bittersweet decision to end there. But I'm just wondering, since choosing that as the ending and now then giving birth, and I think you gave birth while you were doing edits, like then how does the story change?
How does the story change? I mean, I always knew that I wanted to end on the trip. That was the one that was going to be my one mystery in the book, because if you look at the essays, usually the passage of time has been so great that I've had time to reflect on it. But I made a conscious decision that as part of writing this book, I would use the book as an excuse to go back home, which I had been putting off for way too long. So I didn't know how it was going to end. And so I was sort of like, whatever happens on the trip is going to be the last chapter. What I
Mhm.
what was going to happen was that I was going to be able to get into the house, and I would look at the house of my father, and I would do art criticism or whatever. I would be like, and here is what it says about the man. But like life is different. I get there, I cannot enter the house. I can't even see where he's buried. Like I can't actually do any of the things that I thought I was going to plan. My
Mm.
brother doesn't show up. And I was like, okay, I just gotta write the truth. I just gotta like write what happened.
Mhm.
And like sometimes going home, you know, to your motherland like can look like a lot of things. It's not always like the satisfying eat, pray, love, beautiful. I actually didn't read Eat, Pray, Love. Maybe it has a complex ending, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes it's just not like a nice, neat wrap up.
Right.
People will let you down and you'll make the trip. And I think it was still worth trying and making that effort. I think my father would have appreciated that I made the effort as a kind of conciliatory gesture. Um, and the fluttering of life, I mean, it just like kind of coincided because I think I was about maybe 17, 18 weeks pregnant by the end. So it just so happened that like I finally started feeling him. Um, but I kind of like that it ended there. I sort of felt like, okay, I've given the reader a lot of history about myself. And I suppose we're now all curious of like what will I pass on? This is now that my history is also the history of this little person. And knowing that, I don't know what kind of parent will I be.
Mm.
I wanted to leave it wide open, but I sort of felt like here's a new chapter that I don't have control over, but there is like all this past that informs it. And hopefully I will be able to spare him from some of the like difficulties that I had as a kid, but maybe some of the wisdom I'll take with me
Mhm.
and share with him. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah, what did you say? You hope he doesn't write a memoir about you when he goes.
Yeah, I was like, no, thank you.
You're
Not
like,
allowed.
I'll pay for therapy, just don't write the memoir.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's funny. Well, speaking of family, Nia had a question about family. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I love hearing the kind of the whole backstory and what you've learned through this process. And in reading this, obviously, like you are learning through this experience all the different complexities of family. And I'm curious how much you brought your family into the writing process and publishing process of this book, and if so, like what was their reaction to you putting the family story out here?
Oh, so I did bring them in. I interviewed my adoptive mom. I had
Mm.
conversations with my biological mom, with my adoptive dad, even with my adoptive dad's mom, my grandma, just to like, I wanted to get some basic facts right. So, like the story of my adoption, I wanted to make sure, that the details lined up with everyone's memory. Um, So they definitely knew about it and they were excited. Now, mind you, most of my family doesn't speak English. They're mostly French speakers. They were like, "Yay! Can't wait to read it." They don't know it. I mean, it has to be translated. So right now they're very supportive. Um, they've just kind of trusted me. Um, in terms of involving them, I think I was most protective of my mom, of my adoptive mom, just because, well, she's very private. And initially she said, well, I can't be in the book. And I said, well, that's not going to work because it's a memoir and it's been, so you're in there. You'll just have to trust me. But for me, this book is in a way a love story to her. I didn't want to flatten her into a saint. Like my mom has a lot of character. She has a lot of personality. Um, but I really, so I wanted it to come through for the reader, like how much I like love her, obviously, and how appreciative I am of all the sacrifices she's made for me. So it was important for me that that come through in the stories that I told. Um, I had some complicated feelings about sort of what to share about my adoptive father and my biological father, just because they have been disappointing in some ways. But then I thought, but they did it. They did the thing. So, they did the thing that I said they did. Like, they were gone for X amount of years. And so, and some, like, I've worked really hard not to be vicious because I don't want to embarrass anyone through this book. But if someone steps out of your life for 10 years, I can't invent 10 years just to spare their reputation, so that had to go in the book. So I'm sure my adoptive father might have some complicated feelings about it, but I thought that was fair. But I've generally tried to be fair to everyone. I've also, with family members, I didn't really change names, but with acquaintances, if the story, my rule was that if I told a story about someone and it was unflattering, so when I write about my relationship with my roommate, a relationship that disintegrated, I changed his name. So I'm not trying to burn his life down. I'm trying to just explain how things went with this person. And I guess his first name is not that important. So yeah, I just didn't want to be cruel is what it boils down to.
Yeah. That's great. It's really good. And something that comes up a lot is universal in writing memoir, since our lives don't belong to us alone. So I totally understand your mom's response.
We should all live our lives as if someone might someday write a memoir.
Right. Exactly.
Might catch some strays.
And we'd all be better behaved, right? That would be nice. Great. So I've dropped a couple of my favorite passages in the book in the chat, and I'm inviting other people to do that, or other questions that you have for Vanessa to open it up. But I put in, each place where I lived demanded a piece of me in exchange for acceptance. I was really struck by that. Beautiful and painful.
Did you put the page numbers in, Faith?
Me? No, I can't. Because I already had them in my written on my question form here, and I didn't do that. And then my blackness was a marker that assigned me in and out of teams. It's clear which chapter that's from. I related to that as well. The stark contrast against my dad's white skin and differing last name reminded me of having been imported, an outsider in my body in my own home. Loved that. And then from the first chapter, the part, it's the confidence in this universality that emboldens us to ask complete strangers where they are from. We pry, certain that they will recognize elements of ourselves in the stranger's answer, no matter the distance between our places of birth and present circumstances. And of course, operating with different definitions of home too, because like in Africa, it doesn't matter if you've never been there, right? If that's where your ancestral village is from, it's home, but Americans will challenge you on that and be like, well, that's not really your home. So so there's that. Okay, so Ole, yeah, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I just wonder, since much of your family is French speaking, do you feel as comfortable in French as you do in English?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I think the more time I spend in France, so when I come back, my French also comes back. But yeah, I'm pretty much equally fluent in both. So.
Wow. But do you write in French, write creatively?
Oh, no.
No.
I used to, but now I think I'd have to I'm sure I would make a lot of spelling mistakes. Like I'd have to go back and read more in French for it to come back. Yeah. It's a little sad, because that was my first language, and now
right.
I dream in English, I write in English. So,
yeah. Oh wow, write in English, huh? And do you are you different in different languages?
Yes. I think I'm it's funny, I think my family, both my Cameroonian family and our French family friends think of me as maybe a little bit of a wallflower. Like, I think people think I'm very shy and demure. And I think that's in part because I'm much more confident in English. Even though I'm fluent in both, you know, you have to remember that I left France when I was in 6th grade. So like a lot of my interests are adult interests. Like I can talk about the economy in English. I can't talk about the economy like in great depth. I can barely describe my job in French, you know, with all the terms that I need. And so I think people so I probably just speak less. People kind of assume, oh, she's just so shy and demure. And it's like, you have no idea. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Oh yeah. So that that definitely makes sense. The age part definitely makes sense. But yeah, and then I'm wondering about the languages. So I just spent the summer in Morocco, and folks there are trying to get rid of French, and you know, as a kind of a decolonizing act, and they're like really into English, which doesn't have the same history, which but they were also just saying, like, a lot of the women and queer folks were saying that they could articulate who they were or the things that mattered to them better in English. There was a kind of a openness to the language, and you know how you can take in new words and create new words a lot, and you know, like the French don't really love that, and so that they were freer, they could be their more authentic selves to talk about things that they weren't supposed to talk about in Arabic or in French. So it was really interesting.
I could see that. There's also this interesting thing where for all its flaws, for all of America's flaws, you know, America has had a civil rights revolution, whereas France hasn't.
Right.
At least not like race-based. So there are just words that basically young French people are borrowing from English because they don't have the history. They don't have their own language for it. They have to like borrow it from elsewhere. Yeah. I think in some ways they're quite behind, at least in the conversations.
Right.
Like the
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's something that well, I know Nana, that's something we talk about too in our group of Afro-Nordic folks, what can be articulated in Nordic languages and what cannot, around race, etc. Okay, Pamela, you have a question?
No,
A reading for us? What?
no.
You're unmuted. I thought you were like, it was time for Pamela to read to us because you're so good at this.
Thank you for asking, but no.
Okay. That's funny. Okay, well, anyone else? Anything they'd like to say? I love the Ishiguro quote too, that yes, does it feel like this to you? I was like, you know, the way we write to connect with others. I thought that was also a really great way to begin the book. You know, it's just a classic theme of one, we write to create the world we wish to exist. We write to create the book that we'd like to read. We, you know, create ourselves and our worlds through words, and then that on some level it's just, you know, an attempt to connect. It's a, you know, it's a long, a painful way to connect by being by yourself at a computer writing words, hoping that people may not read. It's like kind of a funny way to want to connect with people. But it's very powerful when it does work. So I appreciated that.
Oh, does Olay have a question?
Yes.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I was just wondering, are you going to translate the book into French yourself, or are you planning to have it translated?
It's up to my publisher. So I think they did pitch it to French houses, and the French houses weren't interested, which I guess is not that shocking to me.
Right.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, well, this checks out. So I don't know. It just hasn't happened, and I wouldn't translate it myself. I mean, I think translation is really an art, and I think just because I wrote the English version doesn't mean I could I'm not sure I'd be the best person to translate it. So
Did
I
you
would
like
it to be
Go ahead.
someday. I said it would, it would be great if someday it was translated.
Yeah, definitely. You did do the audio though.
I did do the audio in part because I write about names and how important they are to me. And I was like, what are the odds that you're going to find a reader who can both pronounce the French names as I need them to be pronounced, the African names. I mean, it would break my heart if my own audiobook like butchered.
Yeah.
I just have a few like Iwondo phrases in their last names that are important to me. And so I was like, I just asked finally if I could read it. And I had done some podcasting before, so I was pretty comfortable kind of reading the whole thing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not out of vanity. It's truly the only reason why I read it is because I didn't want the foreign words to be butchered.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, there's plenty. I mean, it's better now. They do have African voice talent, but when audiobooks were first starting, I would buy so many books and just have to throw them away because the pronunciation hurt my heart so much. So, and I mean, particularly when you're, so many of these books then use the oral tradition is so important to like how the story is being written and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really key, when you're talking about language that it does land. So yeah, I think that was a great decision. I just know it's hard to read your own stuff for that long. It's like, it's exhausting. So
yeah. Well, the nice thing is that by the time you read it on audio, you've read it so many times through edits and all that. So I remember like when I was recording, it's just you in the booth and then there's an audio engineer on the other side of the door. And I would like read some like fairly harrowing scene and he'd be like, he'd like come onto I can hear him through my headphones, and he'd be like, wow.
Really?
That was a lot. Like, do you need to take a break? And I was like, no, this happened when I was 16. Like, I've processed it. It's totally fine. We can do the next chapter. Like, I'm good. Yeah. But of course he was hearing it for the first time.
So that's hilarious. That's so funny. Yeah, I did a short one and it was basically about like my uterus. And there was like, young white guy engineer. And I was like, oh my God, because I want an audience. So I just don't, to keep that energy up, but I'm just like, he's like, it's just me. And I was like, are you kidding me? And he's like, don't worry, my mom's a midwife. I'm like, maybe you're okay with it, but I don't care your mom's. That doesn't help me talk about my lady parts.
Oh my gosh.
Really funny.
Well, it sounds like at least he like was mature and like
he was a cool dude. So those things they don't tell you about. That is funny. I'm just leafing through my notes here, see if there's anything else that I didn't hit. I want to, and we've kept you beyond what we'd promised. So this is the last opportunity if anyone wants to ask or say anything. Are you sold? I know that essays are your jam, but are you interested in doing another book?
Oh, yes. I think I'd like to write fiction.
Okay.
I know I'd like to write fiction. I wrote the memoir in part so that I wanted these questions answered, but I also know that often your first novel will have a lot of yourself in it.
Yeah.
And I was concerned that I would fictionalize some of the real stories and not, and I don't know, I guess I thought like I'd like to write it in memoir form so that if you wonder what I think about what this particular thing that happened, you can get my real thoughts from the memoir. And it doesn't mean that like my own life won't seep through the first novel, but the big stuff is out of the way and I've taken my little stances and you can know what I really think about about certain things, sometimes
Mm,
certain big picture political things. So
right.
yes, but I've always wanted to write fiction, and I'm just very, very slowly working on that. I don't think I'll be writing any more memoirs.
Mhm.
Uh, it's too hard. I mean, memoir. I don't know. It's like emotional waterboarding. I like. I want like a good.
Yes, it
Get
is
good.
really hard, which is why I rarely finish anything. And I think this new, like, I love that essays are back because it gives us that opportunity to have a kind of a personal story, but then bring in kind of these larger, kind of historical, political, sociological things that are going on. Um, I
Yeah.
yeah, like the one that you did about what is it? Something deaths, stupid deaths, so really kind of weighing in on like the death of the American dream, but using the personal story to do that. Like I love that kind of public scholarship, being able to do something with your grief, right? Or with whatever, using
Yeah.
your own story to effect. So that hybridity, that hybrid form.
Yeah. And I love that we live in an age where memoir, and especially by people who identify as women, is being taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think when they gave the Literature Nobel Prize to the French memoirist Annie Ernaux, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
like I just think that is such a huge deal, because I think it's a form that, I don't know, that serious literary circles sometimes don't appreciate
Yes.
enough. But
Yeah.
it's actually very difficult to weave in personal narrative with sort of bigger picture themes. It's not an easy task. And
It's
so I don't
not.
know, I feel like the fact that they gave her this prize really says like, no, this form is real and it's as important as like straight nonfiction
Mm-hmm.
or literary fiction, and all these other genres.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I think it's super important. And I've always been a champion of it because I think it upends the traditional kind of power systems of who gets to write history, you know, um, that we were always, written out of or not included. And so that, just an ordinary individual who's not a celebrity or a politician writing their memoirs can, have a testimony about some part of history, and have that enter into the canon, I think is like super important. And people try to dismiss it by calling it navel gazing or women's writing or whatever. So yeah, I think it is really, really important. A great moment to see that. So, yeah, exactly. Okay. Anybody else? I'm just looking back at my notes. I'm not even going to ask about the church.
Yeah.
I grew up in an evangelical town and my
Oh.
father was an Anglican priest, so there's that.
I wrote this book for you. Just
Exactly. It'd be really interesting. How many, I mean, one of the things that was interesting to me when I was touring with my memoir is, I mean, for one thing, people are like, no one's going to read it because it's so specific. It's just such a specific identity. And so for me, it was always really interesting to see who showed up and who connected, because it wasn't necessarily the people I would think. Um, I would have like young refugee kids come and say like, oh, I connected with this, and then it gave me something to talk to my parents about. Or I would have like like I get a lot of like military guys. I have no idea why like ex-military guys like resonate with my story. So it was always just really interesting to see who had found it and what sort of things they got from it, which is always kind of this wonderful gift of writing, particularly when you write something personal, right? That someone who doesn't represent your identity could find a story in it. So I was wondering if you've had any of those experiences where you were just having the book out there, you got a kind of wonderful gift from someone understanding it or coming back into your life?
Oh, I'm not sure I've had that experience. I mean, I think I have been surprised by like the range of like the ages of
Mhm.
people who have connected with the book. Um, and I've been happy that hmm, I think what surprised me the most is really people who who on the surface I truly could not be more opposite. So, like straight white guys who grew up fairly upper middle class, like read the
Mhm.
book and like, okay, when you said this, I like really connected with this. And like I understand that our backgrounds are very different, but like that really resonated with me. Um, I don't know, that made
I love
me
that.
feel like, oh, that's good. You found a nugget, like you were able to look through the past the like kind of superficial differences between us. And then of course, I think I was always most pleased when, I don't know, it's just deeply satisfying when you have someone who's like very who has very kind of mixed roots, and being able to say
Yeah.
like someone like you, who's like, oh, I did go to Harvard and it felt weird, or or like it turned around and yeah, everybody was rich and like that was super weird. So like reading about that was like interesting. Or people who like have people from whose parents are from different countries and they grew up in different countries and now they're here.
Mhm.
That always made me feel like, okay, that is like who I really wrote the book for. And
Right.
then anybody else connects with it, that is wonderful and great.
Right.
But I kind of wrote a book that like, yeah, I would have wanted to read
Right.
back when I was kind of searching for more people like me.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Build it and they will come. Yeah. Exactly. It's putting out the back call for our people and they come. Yeah, that's great. And then yeah, and then it is always just kind of gives you hope for humanity when people who on the surface you wouldn't think they'd get it, then they do get it. And then you see that the power that literature and art has to help people really understand
Yeah. Yeah.
outside their own shoes, which is really
Honestly, the probably the most uncomfortable part of my audience is a lot of my coworkers read it, and they're so sweet, but like they would come to my office door and be like, "So, like, okay, can we talk about like your mom?" You know, because now this like relationship where like I have this kind of yeah, it's kind of an uneven relationship because many of my colleagues who read it, like I feel like I know them just like a little bit, but they
oh
know
yeah,
me
and they don't.
quite
Yeah,
quickly now. So that's a little strange because I just, it's not like a book event where you see people and then maybe you never see them again. You
right.
just see them day after day, and they just know what they know. But that's okay. I knew that was a possibility, and I'm grateful for my colleagues reading the book. It's very nice.
Yes, that is sweet, but yeah, disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, I had the experience of once like getting off a plane, going into the restroom in the airport and coming out. And when I walked into the restroom, a woman was like, gives me this big grin. I was like, wow, she's happy about being in the bathroom. And then when I came out of the stall, she's like, well done. And I was like, that's weird. And then she's like, how is your father, dear? And I was like, oh,
She
okay.
recognized you. That is very cool.
She
That is
recognized me. She had read about me. And she's like, because I was like, do we know each other? She's like, no, but I love your work. And I was like, oh, that is so weird.
wonderful and strange,
Yes,
but
but
really wonderful.
disconcerting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very odd. Okay. So, well, if nobody else has anything else, I'm going to let you go. I know it's what, 10 o'clock there now?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure chatting with
Yeah.
you. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. Great to see you again and have a wonderful time with your family.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.